It is a mystery to me how that happens. It is a mystery to me how free-flowing that is. I mean, were you really watching? Right? I mean, yeah, there's notes on the page, but this is where the details of the page and the Spirit of God really comes in. And they cue each other, and they play together, and they pause when someone else is going to do a little bit, and oh my gosh. Can you imagine this world if we played together like that? If we were selfless enough that we could say, okay, it's your turn, and confident enough that we could play, and you know, maybe it's not perfect, but oh my gosh, does it become perfect or what? It is a mystery to me how they do that. And it's not beyond me to say we had three, a trinity of improvisation here. Do you call them solos, Rachel? Those little things? Yeah, improvs. So yeah, the Trinity is a mystery. So we're going to bypass all of the water, ice, and steam, shell, yolk, and white, skin, fruit, and seed analogies. We're going to take a detour around the Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, 1 and 3, 3 and 1, without confusion or complication of the doctrines, the creeds, and the dogmas. Not because they're unimportant or because they're like using a single musical note to describe the entirety of Mozart's compositions, or like using an invisible force to describe to a friend Newton's laws of gravity, or like having a single emoji unlock the imperceptible workings of Bluetooth, let alone the latest, greatest smartphone. No, we're not going to do that because you already know it. You are already doing it. You just don't know that you're doing it. A friend whispered in my ear this morning that as the United Methodist Church in this country is gathering, they're voting to divide. They gather to be unified, and they're voting, or have voted, I'm not sure, I haven't read the headline yet, to divide. We've got wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East. Lord knows where else we have conflict and strife and division and brokenness. In times like these, Fred Rogers used to encourage us to look for the helpers. Well, I saw a commencement speech recently by the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and he pretty much did the opposite of that. He said, the best way to spot an idiot is to look for the person who is being cruel. Let me explain. When we see someone who doesn't look like us or sound like us or act like us or love like us or live like us, our first reactions, our first thought that crosses almost everyone's brain is rooted in fear or judgment or both. That's God's design called evolution. We survived as a species by being suspicious of things that we're not familiar with. In order to be kind, we have to shut down that animal instinct and force our brains to travel a different pathway. empathy and compassion are evolved states of being. They require the mental capacity to step past our most primal urges. This may be a surprising assessment because somewhere along the way, within the last couple of decades, our society has come to believe that weaponizing cruelty is part of a well thought out master plan. Cruelty is seen as some kind of a clever strategy to gain power. Empathy and kindness are too often viewed as weakness. Many important and powerful people look at the vulnerable only as rungs of a ladder to climb. I'm here to tell you that when someone's path through this world is marked by acts of cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. They never forced their animal brain to evolve past the first instinct. They never forged new mental pathways to overcome their own instinctual fears. And so their thinking and problem solving will lack the imagination and creativity that the kindest people have in spades. Over many years in counseling and ministry, I have found this to be almost universally true. The kindest person in the room are people with a deep faith, so grounded and rooted in perfect love that they share it with everyone in the room without even meaning to. One of our partners in Without Reservations, who you've met so many times that many aren't sure whether he's one of Calvin's chronic visitors or a member, John Connolly, was the first person to call to my attention the art on the front cover of your bulletins, to call to my attention the significance of Western Pennsylvania and our calling to heal, to mend, to reconcile broken relationships.
I did a sculpture of George Washington and a Native American named Guyasuta.
The story of Guyasuta, who's a famous Seneca chief, is a central historical figure in this region. His name should be as well known as George Washington, John Forbes, any of the great leaders who were here in the region in the 18th century. You know, he's at the heart of everything that goes on here for many years.
There's sometimes a disconnect between, history and reality. Guyasuta really did help establish government-to-government relations between Native people and, the federal government.
Guyasuta is a leader who is so deeply involved here in terms of diplomacy, trade, warfare, that his story should be known by everybody in this region.
There was some debate when it went through the Art Commission to get it approved locally.
The controversy over at the Art Commission of Pittsburgh was, do we really want to talk about this? We really treated indigenous people bad.
Because the whole point of the whole point was George Washington having, fought in the French and Indian War and also had met Guyasuta early on in that war, and Guyasuta was
His guide.
He was his guide. At the end of the war, and this is post-French and Indian War, but before the American Revolution,
Right.
George Washington had promised a lot of guys some land for fighting in that war from here down the Ohio. And so here he is surveying. He comes down and he's looking at plots of land. He runs into Gayasuta. They have this 9-hour, I think, long council, sitting at a fire and talking things over and rehashing the past and going over what promises were made, because there was a treaty that said no white settlement west of the Alleghenies. So here's our man looking for land.
We need to have civil dialogue, and to me, that was the strength in it for me, from day one.
So, when you're working on the maquette, what images do you really feel like you wanted to portray in this? Like, I see like 2 strong men there.
I wanted equal, but I wanted tension. I wanted the weapons there, but they were set aside. They were at peace. So I wanted to portray where they came from in their own history. I always wanted the passion of them being equal, and I always wanted there to be that intensity. I assume because they're together that there's an intensity. I stuck with the story as they were together, they were apart, they fought, and they're having civil conversation, and they're equal. Hopefully that's where I ended up at the end of the day.
I think that's where we all want to end up. Nobody wants to wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to fight with somebody. Nobody ever wants to wake up and say, I'm going to have a disagreement. Nobody wakes up and says, I want to feel bad about another person. When those things do come up and you do feel bad, you do feel angry, you do, fight, I think that's the whole goal of like what our parents try to teach us, our grandparents try to teach us, is try to work things out, try to talk things out. What greater thing can a warrior have than a weapon and not use it? That's a symbol. You're holding it in your hand, you're ready to fight, but you don't want to. I think that's a really good representation of what's going on with that statue. They're looking eye to eye. They're not paying attention to their weapons. They're exchanging energy. They're trying to understand each other. I think that's pretty powerful, looking eye to eye to a person that you may once have looked as an enemy.
What do you think the biggest misconception about Native Americans are?
That we're not here. And it's the one thing that, is pretty common throughout Native America, is the perception that we're defeated. We're not defeated. Seneca people are still in their tribal homelands. What does defeat look like? If defeat looks like, you won a war, good for you. But really, who won? We're right where we're supposed to be. On my family land, my family stayed there since before the United States was a thing. On this little tract of land, my family never moved. Maybe there's concepts that people had placed upon them growing up as kids, and then all of a sudden you're staring at a Native person right in the face, and you're like, that's not totally true. Has some elements of truth to it, and let me take you away and show you why things happen. It makes me feel pretty happy, to tell you the truth. I think the whole point is to really help cross boundaries that have been absent for so long.
Peace starts with us, right?
Yes. Thank you.
The peace of our triune God starts with us. Don't believe the lie that comfort is the objective. It is a very uncomfortable thing to do. And it is unquestionably what we are called to do. They didn't have air conditioning when they did that 9-hour dialogue, right? There's probably flies and gnats and stuff all over the place. It probably stunk to high heaven. They had been to war against each other. And yet they spent a day together. That treaty was one of the first treaties, John Connolly will tell you, that our nation broke with the indigenous people. That treaty is really the beginning of a way of life that we have had and that we've benefited from. It starts with us. The peace starts with us. I don't know how the band plays the way they do. I don't know how we do it. I think Doug Tilton was right. I think you guys are right. I think a ministry of presence that's building relationships, that's nurturing relationships, that's preparing for whatever God gives us next. That is how we get to that. Friends, we live in a cruel world where powerful people look at vulnerable people as rungs on a ladder to the top. They lack the imagination and creativity that you have in spades to become the triune God's hands and feet that mend and heal and reconcile broken relationships and build. Maybe even planting a seed for a tree under which we'll never benefit from the shade, but build beloved community. That is what you are doing, my friends. It's the best Trinity sermon I've ever heard. It's just as Thomas Merton said, the Trinity is at once infinite solitude, one nature, and perfect society, three persons. One infinite love, three subsistent relations. Amen? Amen.